Before you click away to another video, take a moment and really listen, because what you're about to hear is something almost nobody talks about openly. Take that in. So many people believe that once they stop chasing an avoidant, stop over-explaining themselves, stop trying to rescue the relationship, nothing will ever change. They assume their silence won't register because it often felt like their presence never registered either. But the reality is quite different. Sit with that for a second. The instant an avoidant realizes you've truly let go, not to spark jealousy, not as some clever tactic, not to force a reaction, but because you've genuinely chosen to move forward, something shifts far beneath their surface. It's fascinating, really. A part of them they've hidden away for a long time suddenly stirs to life. This matters because you've likely spent months, maybe even years, asking yourself why every act of love only pushed them further away. The more patient you were, the more understanding you gave. The more of yourself you offered, the further they seemed to drift. Yet the moment you stop pouring your energy into them, they start to react. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's impossible to miss. Either way, they feel it. They notice the space you've left behind in a way your constant presence never let them experience. Most people never figure out why this happens. An avoidant often builds their whole emotional world around one quiet assumption, that you'll always be there. They unconsciously count on you to wait, to forgive, and to reconnect the moment they're ready. Without meaning to, you become the emotional cushion beneath them. When that cushion vanishes, not because you're playing games, but because you've genuinely walked away, their inner world begins to unravel. Many people mistake avoidance for simply not caring. They assume avoidants are emotionally cold, or that losing someone even brings them a sense of relief. But that's only the version visible from the outside. Underneath that distance sits something far more tangled. Their deepest fear isn't closeness itself. It's losing control. It's feeling emotionally exposed. It's allowing themselves to be vulnerable. And buried beneath all of that lies an even deeper fear they almost never admit, even to themselves, the fear of being abandoned. Ironically, they often push people away to shield themselves from the very rejection they dread most, all while quietly craving real connection. That's exactly why your absence hits them so hard. At first, the shifts are small. They might start checking your social media more often. Their replies may turn slower, more careful, or oddly thoughtful. They could send casual messages that seem to mean nothing, quietly testing whether you're still emotionally reachable. None of this is random. These are signs that their nervous system has picked up on something important changing. The certainty they leaned on is gone now. The comfort of knowing you'd always be around has slipped away. What comes next isn't logical at all. They don't suddenly come rushing back with an apology or spill everything they've been feeling. Instead, their mind spirals. They replay old conversations, question past choices, pick apart every interaction, and wonder if they misread your intentions. Part of them wants to reconnect, but another part fears what emotional exposure might cost them. That tug of war creates confusion, anxiety, and stress all rolled into one. For the first time, they realize the person they assumed would always be within reach might actually be gone for good. That realization carries far more emotional weight than every ounce of effort you put into holding the relationship together. If you've ever felt invisible in an avoidance life, if you've wondered why your love, patience, and commitment never seem to move the needle, this is where it finally starts to click. You'll finally understand why chasing so often creates distance, why real absence creates movement, and what's genuinely happening inside an avoidant's mind and body once they realize you've stopped fighting for the relationship. So many people wonder why avoidants pull back when they're given love, yet seem to drift closer once that love stops chasing them. Why does letting go trigger the exact reaction you'd been hoping for all along? The answer starts with the first stage of their internal response. The moment an avoidant realizes you've genuinely stopped fighting for the connection, their first reaction is quiet panic. They won't say it out loud. They won't announce it to anyone. Most of the time, they won't even let it show on their face. They won't suddenly ring you up, pour their heart out, or admit what's going on inside. From the outside, it might look like nothing has shifted, but inside, their nervous system is under real strain. Many people assume avoidants glide through moving on without effort, that your absence hands them peace. That's the story they tell themselves, but it's far from the whole truth. Beneath that calm exterior sits an emotional struggle they rarely let anyone witness. An avoidant's emotional distance usually rests on one quiet belief that you'll always stick around. Their entire coping style depends on knowing they can reconnect whenever they feel ready. Without realizing it, they lean on your consistency. You become a source of emotional safety they barely notice until it's suddenly not there. The moment they realize your distance is real, not a tactic, not a bid for attention, but a genuine decision to move on, their emotional foundation starts to crack. Contrary to what most people think, closeness isn't their biggest fear. What actually terrifies them is losing control, exposing their emotions, and letting themselves be vulnerable. And underneath all of that sits an even deeper fear they rarely own up to, being abandoned. They often push people away before anyone gets the chance to leave first, even while secretly aching for closeness. When someone who made them feel emotionally secure suddenly disappears, they aren't left untouched. Something inside them stirs. You might notice them quietly checking your social media more than before. Their texts grow shorter, slower, or strangely guarded. They may hesitate before responding, or communicate in ways that feel unfamiliar. One thought starts nagging at them. What if this person is really, truly gone? That question changes everything. Avoidance feels safe to them as long as they believe you're still emotionally invested. As long as you're chasing, forgiving, and staying available, they feel like they hold the reins on the distance between you. But once you genuinely step back, that sense of control disappears. They suddenly lose the person who gave them emotional stability without asking for much in return, and that loss lands harder than they ever expected. Their reaction isn't simple. They don't jump straight to an apology or open up about their feelings. Instead, they retreat further into their own head. They replay conversations, dissect every interaction, and hunt for the exact moment things changed. They wonder what they got wrong or whether they made some mistake. But they don't know how to fix things without exposing emotions they've spent years guarding. This sparks an exhausting internal tug of war. One side of them craves independence, the other desperately wants connection. Your absence forces those two sides to collide. They finally have to face the emptiness they built themselves. For years, they may have told themselves they were happiest solo, that they didn't need anyone, and that keeping their distance kept them safe. But when someone who truly mattered actually leaves, the emotional impact catches them off guard. Even if they never say it out loud, curiosity builds. They ask mutual friends about you, bring up old memories in passing, or quietly watch your life unfold from a distance, trying to gauge where they stand without letting on how much they actually care. Many mistake this lack of pursuit for indifference. In truth, reaching out feels like an emotional risk to them. Still, your absence stirs up a storm they can't dodge forever. Suddenly, you're on their mind more than you ever were while you were constantly around, because now the idea of losing you for good feels real. This experience touches both their mind and their body. Avoidants often regulate themselves through distance. Once that distance stops feeling like their own choice, their usual coping method breaks down. Anxiety climbs. Buried feelings start rising to the surface. The attachment they denied becomes too loud to ignore. At first, they might pull back even further, not because they don't care, but because it's all too much. Later on, they often circle back in small, quiet ways. A casual text, a reaction to a post, or a small attempt to reopen the door without ever admitting what they're actually feeling. None of this is random. These are careful, guarded attempts to reconnect while still protecting themselves from vulnerability. For the first time, they're living through the uncertainty, the fear of loss, and the longing you've probably carried for a long time. That emotional jolt starts to crack the walls they've leaned on for years. Memories grow sharper, thoughts of you surface more often. Slowly, their desire to stay connected starts to compete with their instinct to protect themselves. This shift rarely opens with a dramatic apology. It starts with confusion. They spent so long assuming you'd always be within reach that your absence feels foreign to them. You represented steadiness, patience, and consistency. Even while pushing distance between you, they leaned on those qualities more than they ever realized. Once you're gone, everything feels shakier, silence turns uncomfortable, the gap feels bigger than expected, and the control they once relied on disappears, leaving them restless, unsettled, and emotionally thrown off balance. This confusion comes from losing predictability. Predictability used to bring them comfort. Your steady presence formed an emotional system they quietly depended on. Once that system falls away, uncertainty takes over completely. Their craving for control collides head-on with emotions they've dodged for years, forcing them to feel attachment, fear, and longing in real time. That's exactly why everything shifts the moment you truly let go. Panic, confusion, endless overthinking, quiet attempts to reconnect, emotional turbulence, and a growing awareness of how much they leaned on your presence. All of it plays out beneath the surface. They rarely show it, but this is often the very first honest glimpse into their hidden emotional world. As the confusion deepens, it quietly turns into unease. They start noticing things they used to brush off. They check your online activity, linger on your stories, catch small changes in your life, and search for reassurance without fully understanding why. Deep inside, they're trying to figure out whether that emotional door is still open. Once they realize you're no longer reaching out or waiting around, the uncertainty grows even stronger. They can't quite grasp why your distance feels different this time around, more final, more real. Avoidants struggle with uncertainty because uncertainty forces them to actually feel something. Their attachment system is wired to dodge emotional overwhelm. They create distance the moment emotions run high, pull back when relationships deepen, and retreat whenever vulnerability gets too close for comfort. But now, the overwhelming emotion is coming from your absence, and that's a situation they've never learned how to handle. Instead of sitting with those feelings, they try to think their way out of them. They replay conversations, revisit old memories, and hunt for the exact moment everything changed. Eventually, one difficult question starts to surface, a question they've dodged for a long time. Did I push this person too far? That's when confusion slowly turns into self-doubt. They start questioning their own assumptions, their decisions. the choices that widen the gap between you. Self-doubt sits heavy with them because it opens the door to vulnerability and forces them to admit something they've long denied, that they may have cared far more than they ever let themselves believe. Rather than reaching out right away, they quietly watch. They observe from a distance, hoping answers will show up before they have to risk exposing themselves. Instead of speaking openly, they turn into a silent observer. They watch, gather little clues, and try to read how you feel without ever asking you directly. They study your tone, your online activity, what you share, and any hint that you might still be emotionally reachable. Though avoidants often run from closeness, they still crave connection deep down. The trouble is, closeness overwhelms them, so they never quite learn how to hold on to it. Once they realize you're no longer emotionally within reach, the entire emotional world they quietly leaned on starts falling apart. For so long, they assumed they could create distance whenever they wanted because you'd always be there waiting. Once that belief crumbles, a heavy pressure sets in. Confusion turns into tension. Tension turns into restlessness. And eventually that restlessness morphs into a quiet fear they can no longer ignore. The unsettling thought that they might actually lose you. Avoidants aren't just afraid of commitment. More often, what scares them is losing themselves inside emotional vulnerability. But losing someone who made them feel safe stirs up a completely different fear. It doesn't threaten their independence. It threatens the emotional balance they've spent years guarding. The hidden fear of abandonment they worked so hard to bury suddenly rises straight to the surface. Once they recognize you're truly moving on, their usual defenses stop shielding them. Instead, those same defenses start exposing everything they've tried to suppress. They might keep acting like nothing's wrong, but internally the confusion turns into something far heavier. It slowly becomes grief, even if they never actually call it that. You become the unfinished chapter they can't stop replaying, the question they can't answer, the silence that echoes louder than your presence ever did. Most won't come rushing back with apologies or dramatic confessions. Instead, they quietly reach a point where the emotional walls they've depended on start to crack. For the first time, they realize something has fundamentally shifted because you stopped carrying the relationship alone. One of the biggest misunderstandings about avoidance is assuming they panic simply because they're afraid of losing you. In reality, what shocks them first is losing the illusion that they were the ones controlling the distance between you. As long as you kept reaching out, explaining yourself, patching things up, and keeping the connection alive, they felt safe staying emotionally guarded. Your effort was quietly filling the emotional gaps they couldn't fill on their own. The moment you step back with calm acceptance instead of anger or manipulation, they find themselves in emotional territory they simply don't know how to navigate. They finally see that your patience, consistency, and care were holding together far more of the relationship than they ever admitted. Without your effort, they lose not just the connection, but the emotional safety they unconsciously leaned on. At first, they're simply puzzled. They can sense your energy has shifted, yet nothing dramatic seems to have happened. You're not arguing, blaming, or demanding answers. You've simply stopped carrying the weight of the relationship. Avoidants often pick up on emotional energy long before any words are spoken. They feel the absence of your reassurance, your warmth, the emotional stability you quietly gave without ever asking for credit. That uncertainty forces some uncomfortable self-reflection. Questions start bubbling up that they've spent a long time avoiding. Why did they stop reaching out? Did I mistake their patience for permanence? Did I push them too far? Have I lost someone who genuinely cared about me? Conflict is often easier for an avoidant to handle than emotional neutrality. Arguments still mean the connection is alive. Calm detachment feels far more threatening because it suggests you've made peace with the loss and moved forward. That kind of silence leaves them nothing to push against. Then another shift kicks in. For the first time, they're facing the real consequences of all that emotional distance they created. They assumed the relationship would always be sitting there waiting for them. They believed your love would stay available no matter how often they pulled away. Once you stop initiating, stop giving, stop holding the bond together, that assumption collapses. The loss becomes impossible to look away from. Your absence forces them to recognize something they couldn't see before. They start understanding that your commitment wasn't desperation, it was generosity. Your communication wasn't pressure, it was honesty. Your presence wasn't suffocating, it was comforting. What once felt ordinary now feels painfully precious simply because it's gone. As they sit with it, they start remembering all the countless ways you supported them. Your patience, your understanding, your consistency become impossible to brush aside. Life without your emotional presence creates a contrast they can't outrun. Only through losing it do they finally grasp what it actually meant. Bit by bit, they realized they weren't protecting themselves from you. They were protecting themselves from intimacy, from vulnerability, from emotions they never learned to face head-on. That realization brings an emptiness they didn't see coming. Not peaceful solitude, but a deep sense that something meaningful is missing. Regret starts replacing the certainty they once had. They feel the weight of the emotional walls they built around themselves. What surprises them most isn't conflict or rejection, it's your peace. They expected more arguments, more chasing, more emotional outbursts. They never imagined you'd quietly choose yourself instead. Avoidants rarely fear loss until it becomes real. They rarely fear silence until it actually lasts. They rarely fear someone leaving until that person has truly let go. That reality forces them to sit with a hard truth they'd been dodging for a long time. Maybe you weren't asking for too much after all. Maybe they simply weren't able to give what the relationship needed at the time. Their first reaction isn't relief. It isn't indifference either, it's shock. And for many avoidants, that shock becomes the beginning of real awareness. This is often where what people call the phantom X effect starts to show up. Once someone is truly gone, the avoidant starts viewing the relationship through an entirely different lens. They remember your patience more clearly now. They recognize your kindness for what it was. Messages they once brushed off now feel like genuine expressions of love. The care they once mistook for pressure starts looking a lot like emotional safety. Avoidants tend to understand relationships through contrast rather than conversation. It isn't until your emotional presence disappears that they fully grasp what it meant. Your absence becomes a mirror, reflecting everything they couldn't see while you were still around. In that reflection, they finally admit something they've been avoiding all along. They cared. They formed an attachment, and losing you actually hurts. What they miss isn't only your presence. They also miss who they became around you, the version of themselves that felt lighter, more open, more relaxed, more playful, and more emotionally alive. That awareness doesn't hit them overnight. It builds quietly, growing stronger over time until it simply can't be ignored anymore. The emotional safety you gave an avoidant is something they often don't realize they're leaning on until it's gone. Losing that safe space forces them to face emotions they've buried for years, and it brings on a kind of regret that reshapes how they see both themselves and relationships. The version of themselves that felt accepted, relaxed, and free enough to lower their guard existed only because of the connection you built. The moment you walk away, that feeling walks away with you. As this reality sinks in, an internal battle begins inside them. They don't want to chase, they don't want to admit they care, they don't want to expose their vulnerability, yet the pressure just keeps building. They wonder if you've truly moved on, if you still feel something for them, or if reaching out would only end in rejection. For someone who relies on control to feel emotionally safe, this kind of uncertainty is deeply unsettling. Instead of making big, dramatic declarations, they usually circle back in quiet, low-risk ways. A casual message, a like on an old post, or a shared song might be their way of testing whether the door is still open. None of these small moves are random. They're careful, guarded attempts to reconnect without risking full emotional exposure. Ironically, losing you doesn't bring the relief they thought it would. Once the silence settles in, they often realize they cared far more than they ever let on. They start to recognize your patience, your consistency, and your emotional support as things that made them feel safer than they ever truly understood. They begin to see that what they once pushed away wasn't pressure at all, it was genuine care. This is exactly why avoidants often react more strongly once someone truly lets go. Without the constant pursuit, the emotional pressure lifts, and that finally lets them see the relationship with clear eyes. They stop focusing on self-protection and start recognizing exactly what they lost. But letting go was never about making them come back. It's about choosing yourself. Walking away just to force a reaction is still a form of waiting. Walking away because you value yourself changes everything. It reminds them that you were never guaranteed to stay. You were a gift they failed to appreciate while they had it. Whether they come back or not starts to matter less and less. If they do return, they return to someone who already knows their own worth. If they don't, you've freed yourself from chasing someone who was never ready to meet you halfway. This is the real power of letting go. It isn't about punishment or manipulation. It's about self-respect. Your silence, your boundaries, and your willingness to stop carrying the relationship on your own become a mirror, reflecting everything that was missing all along. For an avoidant, that mirror can become the start of genuine awareness. They come to understand that control can never replace real emotional connection, and that distance can't erase attachment forever. Sometimes that realization sparks meaningful change. Sometimes it doesn't. Either way, you've already come out ahead. You've chosen dignity over desperation, self-worth over uncertainty, and peace over endless pursuit. Real love can only exist when both people choose each other as equals. By honoring yourself first, you set the standard for every relationship that comes after, and that, in the end, is the greatest transformation of all.